Hey everybody, in this video we're going to be taking a look at the uniforms of the Empire for Warhammer the Old World by Games Workshop. And we picked out three in particular that we're going to show you how to paint, but the methods and techniques we're going to show you here can be applied to just about any state, because when it comes to painting an army of the Empire, you've got loads of options and loads of different colours and lots of ways of representing them on your miniatures. But the three uniforms we're going to be painting are going to be Marienburg first of all, followed by Nuln, and then we're going to take a look at Middenheim as well. So we hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. The first uniform we're going to take a look at is for the city of Marienburg, and for this miniature, and indeed all the miniatures I'm going to paint in this video, I'm starting out from a grey undercoat because this provides a really good starting point for all the paints we're going to be using. The colour I've used is Mechanicus Standard Grey from Citadel, but to be honest you could really paint these uniforms from any undercoat you want, so the choice is yours. Now for Marienburg, what we need to bear in mind is the character of this city. Basically they're really wealthy and they like to show it off, so when you're building your miniatures I recommend you go for as many floppy hats and massive feathers as you can, and what you want to do is paint the uniform in red, yellow and blue. Now for this layout of the colour, really we can approach this like any Empire city in that you can place these colours wherever you want, and you can even change the shades to be whatever you want them to be, provided they are those three colours. But to go with the character of this city, I want them to be nice and bright, so I'm going to be starting out with a nice bright red. I've got some Sanguine Scarlet for this, and to apply it I'm going to be going for a rough base coating brush, so we have here a medium base coat brush from Citadel. Now as I mentioned, you can lay out this uniform whichever way you like, so you can do it half and half, all one colour with a few little accents with the other two colours, the choice is yours. But in this case I'm going to go for a quartered colour scheme, so I want to make sure I go back and forth across the uniform with this colour. So I'm going to start out with this leg just here, and it's just a matter of making sure that it's neatly base coated at this stage, not really worrying about extra details as we go along here. We just want to make sure we get a nice even finish to the colour. Now when you get to the part where you're going to be meeting the other colour, what you should do is just bring this over the central line a little bit. So for example on this leg, as I go up here, what I'm going to do is just go past the middle a little bit to there, then we can clean up as we move on to the next colour. Now as we move it towards the top, this is where the colour is going to swap over for that quartered colour scheme, and whilst doing these sorts of things might seem a little bit tricky at first glance, the great thing about these Empire models is that they all have some sort of design down the centre of the back to help guide you to that middle part. So in this case you can see we've got this almost cross design, and that central line makes it nice and easy to go down the middle. So what we've got to do, just find that area and bring the colour up to that point. Once you're happy with the positioning of that red, the next thing to do is introduce the next colour to it, and this can be either yellow or blue. Now in this case I decided to go for yellow, so that's going to be the other side of the quarter parts of the uniform. Then I'm going to look for some blue and various accents and things, and thinking stuff like the hat and the shield, that sort of thing. So for the yellow, what we now want is a nice mustard yellow that's going to cover over the undercoat well. So here I'm going to use some darks and yellow. Then for the blue, I want a nice bold bright blue, so I'm going to use some marine blue. But to begin with, what we need is that yellow, so I'm using some darks and yellow, and to apply it I'm going for a regular size brush now. So this is a size 1 from Artis Opus, but any medium sized brush like this will be absolutely fine. What you want to do is get that paint thinned and ready as usual, and then it's time to start blocking in the parts of the uniform that you want to be in this colour. So in this case it's going to be the other side of the quartering, so I'm going to be looking at things such as this leg just here, and this one is where we're going to have to be careful when we get to that part where the two colours meet down the centre. But remember, just look for that central line and just paint the colour up to it, so we're looking at going up to about there, like that. As for the jacket, in this case it's much easier because here you have that little central pattern, so this will guide you in making sure you get the right side there like that, a nice neat line between the two colours. We've now got that yellow on there, and if you think about it, at this stage we painted the uniform of Talabecland, but we want to press on to paint the uniform of Marienburg, which means we need to add some blue. So here I've got some marine blue, and I've decided to pick out his hat, so just around here, and also his shield as well. And here we have the model with those three principal colours applied. Now I think we could do with adding a little bit more blue in some more subtle areas. So I'm looking at things like the slashes that we've got on the uniform. Look at the jacket and around the elbows there. I think it look really nice to have little bits of blue in there. But it's not really worthwhile putting it in just yet, because as we do some shading with a wash, that colour will get swamped and sort of disappear. So we may as well just introduce it later on. So what we'll do is do the wash and then come back and add that sort of thing later. For the wash, what we want is a good one that's going to work with all the colours we've got so far. And in this case, a dark brown wash is going to be perfect. So here I'm going to use some Battlemud wash. What you want to do is pick an appropriately sized brush. I'm going for a medium shade brush, which is quite large for this one, but anything like this will be absolutely fine. With it, just load up some of that wash and start painting it directly over these three colours. So for example, on the back of the miniature just here, I'm just going to paint it straight over like this and push it around so it starts running into all the recesses and gives us that shading, and at the same time it'll tie all the colours together. And once you've got it all over the miniature, be sure to give it around about 45 minutes to dry. The wash is now dry, giving us that shading, but it has made things a little bit murky, so the next thing we should do is clean up these colours with some layering. And here what I'm going to do is return to the original three colours I used, starting out with that Sanguine Scarlet. But this time to apply it, I'm going for a finer brush. I have here a size 0 from Artis Opus, but basically it's a medium to small brush with a good point. Any brush of about this size will be absolutely fine. The key thing is to make sure it holds a good point, so you have some accuracy as you start working around finer details. Because with this paint, once it's thinned and ready, what we're looking to do is start to apply it onto the flatter raised areas on the uniform, looking to avoid recesses. So for example, if we look at the back just here, that means reapplying it to areas like this, but being careful not to drop into the recesses of that design just there. And where these creases appear, such as down here, we want to concentrate on the flatter areas and be careful not to drop into the deepest parts. Same on the arm just here. Again, you can see these darker lines where that wash has settled in those creases just there. So we just want to go around them, making sure to concentrate on the flat areas. Here you can see the result of doing that is that we've now got a nice clean red, so we can move on to doing the same thing on the other two colours. We'll start out with the yellow. Here I'm returning to Dark Sun Yellow, and then for the blue I'm going to go back to some Marine Blue. And whilst doing the blue, we can also now look for little extra parts where we can put it in onto the main part of the uniform. But we'll start out with that yellow, so I'm using Dark Sun Yellow here, and the application for this one is going to be identical to what we just done with that red. Just a matter of making sure your paint's thinned and ready, and then once you've done so, we can start applying it onto these parts of the uniform, where just like with the red, we need to be careful to avoid the deeper recesses and instead concentrate on flatter areas. So for example, on the jacket just here, that means applying it to areas like this, just being careful of the really deep shaded parts as we encounter them. And then finally, it's time to return to the blue. So here I'm using Marine Blue once again, applying it in the same way that we've just done with the red and the yellow. But at the same time with the blue, I'm now going to be looking for opportunities to introduce it into other little areas of the uniform for little embellishments. So for example, we've got these little slashes on the elbows just here, and what we're going to do is just run it into the deepest areas along there. And with that phase done, the uniform is now much cleaner, so we can move on to highlighting it. And honestly, when it comes to highlighting, this is entirely optional, but it certainly is going to make the models pop more on the battlefield. And for Marienburg, that's definitely what you're going to want to happen. So what we'll do is start out by highlighting the red parts of the uniform, and here we want a nice bright red. So I'm going to use some Demon Red here, and to apply it, I've switched to quite a fine brush now. This is a size 00. If you want to go for a Citadel brush, you're looking at something like a small layer, basically a small brush with a fine point on it, because this will allow us just to paint some fine lines onto these details to help lift them out from the rest of the miniature. So with the paint thinned and ready, we can start looking for the features that really stand out, and the idea now is just to emphasize them by running a bit of this color on those areas. So if we take a look at the arm just here with all the creases, we're looking for the peaks of the crease, such as just here, and all you've got to do is introduce a bit of this color on the very top of it. So just there, for example. As we move further down, we're looking at doing another one along this one right here, and then this one here, and I'm always applying it in this downward motion because it's a nice natural movement and allows you easy access to the area, and also clearly allows you to see what you're doing too. Want to make sure we get across these parts here on the elbow, and then on the actual hand as well. We got the end of the sleeve just there, so again we just want to change the angle to make sure we pick out that edge too. So it's just a matter of doing this across all the red parts of the uniform. And there we are, the red is highlighted, so it's time to do the same thing on the yellow and the blue. And again, what you want to do here is pick out some lighter shades than what you went for originally. So for the yellow, I'm going to be using some Skulky Yellow. Then for the blue, I'm going for Elysium Blue. We'll start out with the yellow, so I'm going to be using that Skulky Yellow, and to apply it I'm going for the small brush again, and the application here is basically the same thing as what we just did on that red, in that we're looking for all the edges and creases of the fabric. I just want to pick them out with a bit of this colour. So once your paint's thin and ready, we can start looking for those features. If we take a look at the back just here, they're going to be the same sort of thing where we're looking for creases and things, and also the outline of these patterns that we've got. So for example, this star-like pattern just here, I'm just going to use the tip of the brush just to skim along the edge of it, just to emphasise it like this. And then finally, we can highlight the blue details with a lighter blue. So here I'm using some Elysium blue, and the application here is the same thing once again, looking for edges and corners and picking them out. But at the same time, with this color, as we've got these slashes picked out, what we can do is use it to emphasize these two. And with this, it's just a matter of carefully applying some of this into the deepest recesses this time, such as in these little slashes we've got right here. And with that, the uniform of this Marienburg soldier is now complete. And so from this point on, it'll be all about painting the weapons, the armor, all those little trinkets and things, and of course the skin. But as you see, in painting this uniform is really fun because it's so bright, it's so colourful with all three primary colours represented. But it's quite easy to make things a bit too garish. So what I recommend you do when you're putting your base coats on the model, just play around with them until you're happy, because at this stage it's very easy to paint over things you're not happy with and just change the positions of the colours. But these colours can be lighter or darker, or they can change from regiment to regiment or model to model, or be the same throughout your entire force and where you lay them out. So the choice really is yours. The next uniform we're going to take a look at is for the city of Nuln, and this is the home of the Empire's gunnery school, and it's where all the best black powder weapons come from. Their uniform is black with a few coloured accents, but black is the most important thing here, so it's a good idea to start out with that. And for this sort of thing, I recommend you actually paint it an off black, and the reason is because this will look black overall, but it also gives you some room to manoeuvre when it comes to shading here, because you can go for a pitch black for that shading, or even a really dark brown, which is what we're going to be doing here. But what we're going to do is start out with that off black, so Death Reaper is going to be perfect for this, and to apply it what you want, a rough base coating brush. So I've got my medium base coat brush here, and with this all we need to do is start by painting the whole uniform in this colour. So here's our hand gunner that we're using for the example here, just a matter of looking for all the fabric and blocking it in at this stage. Once you're happy with that off black, the next thing to do is to begin to introduce some accent colours to the miniature. And the first one I'm going to go for is white on that feather, because I think this always looks nice on a Nuln uniform. It's a really nice contrast against that black. But for the other one, you've actually got a massive amount of choice, because what you're looking for is another colour to break things up. Now, red always works here, so that's what I'm going to use, but you could go for any colour you want. And in fact, a really good use on a Nuln army that I personally like a lot is to use a different colour for different regiments. So for example, green and blue, and just change it on a unit by unit basis, and making detachments that go with that unit the same accent colour as well. But as I mentioned, in this case, we're going to go for red, but we need to start out by base coating that white. And here I'm going for an off-white. I'm going to use some ivory tusk, and then for the red, I'm going to be using some sanguine scarlet. But we'll start out with some ivory tusk, and to apply this one, I'm just going to go for my size 1 brush, and with this colour, I'm just going to be base coating that feather on top of his hat. So with the paint thinned and ready, it's just a matter of blocking this in. Looking at this feature just up here, I just want to make sure that it's neatly base coated across this whole area. With that done, I'm now going to add in the red. So here I'm using some sanguine scarlet, and here just looking for little features and flourishes that you can pick out with this colour. Now, if in doubt, a good one to go for is always going to be the tip of the feather, and in this case, you just want to follow the texture of it to create an almost V-like shape at the very end of it. So we're looking at areas such as there, for example. You can go down as far as you want with that. But also in the case of this hand gunner, I'm going to be looking for things like these little tassels we've got on the side right here. So there's 2 of them just there. And also we can do things like the strap that his ammunition's being hung from. So for example, this strap going over his shoulder just here. We've now got those main colours applied, so it's time to put the wash over all of them. And in this case, we can use a dark brown wash. And you might be wondering why I'm going for a dark brown as opposed to a black on a black uniform like this. And that's because it actually leans into a subtle difference here. Because what using a brown wash will do is give a slightly more earthy, more of a natural feel to things, which I think is appropriate for a soldier like this, where it's a uniform you'll wear on campaign, but also it's going to be made of natural materials too. So it just sort of fits that a little bit better. Now I'm going to be using Battle Mud Wash for this, and to apply it I'm going for my medium shade brush from Citadel, and all we need to do is paint this directly over all 3 of these colours. So once the brush is loaded up, it's just a matter of getting it on there and making sure it runs into all the recesses as you apply it, and once it's all on there, give it about 45 minutes to dry. Once the wash is dry, we have our shading, so it's time to move on to the next step, which is to do some layering to clean things up. Now, when it comes to the black, if I was painting small areas of black and I put the wash on it, I'd normally just leave it like that before moving on to highlighting it. But when that black forms the main part of the colour scheme, as is the case here, it's a good idea to do some layering on it just to make sure everything's nice and clean and just to be sure there's no tide marks from any wash on there. So to do this, what we need to do is go back to that original colour. So in our case, that's going to be some Death Reaper. And to apply this, I'm using my size 0 brush this time. And all we need to do is just reapply this onto the black parts of the uniform, which are of course going to be most of it, but this time we need to make sure that we avoid the deeper recesses so as to keep the shading on those parts. So for example, if we take a look at the arm just here, we have the creases in the fabric, and so we want to concentrate on the flat areas just up here, and just be careful not to let this paint fall into the deeper recesses so as to retain the shading in those parts. With that stage done, we've now re-established that off black, and you can see it does indeed look like black, but the shading's still there, so we do have that depth that we got from the wash. So with that done, we can now do the same sort of thing on the other two colours. We'll start out with that accent colour this time, so in our case that's red. I'm going to be reusing some Sanguine Scarlet here, and then we're going to move on to that off-white and do the same thing there. So here I'm going back to some Ivory Tusk. But I'll start out with some Sanguine Scarlet, and to apply this one I'm going to use the size 0 brush again, and we're going for the same sort of application as what we just did with that black, where we're looking to be careful to avoid the deeper recesses on these features as we encounter them. Now, because these areas are generally quite small, there's not a massive amount to do here, but it is a matter of just identifying those parts that we painted red, so for example this strap just here, and reapplying it onto the main body of it, just being careful not to fall into the recesses. Some areas will be more textured, such as these tassels we've got down here, and when it comes to these, we just want to make sure we pick out the raised parts of them. So there's a little knot around there, we can just dot the paint on, and then we can just lightly flick on the raised parts down the textured area just here. And then we're ready to move on to Ivory Tusk, and with this we just need to do the exact same thing on the feather. And there we are, those colours are nice and clean, so it's now time to move on to the highlighting. And as ever, the highlighting is entirely optional, but if you decide you want to do it, it's a good idea to start out with that black uniform. And here I find a good sort of darkish brownish grey works really nicely because again it leans into that natural fabric feel. So the colour I'm going to be using here is Rodent Grey, and to apply it I've gone down to my size 00 brush. So a nice small one here with a good point on it for lots of control. With this paint, we're now looking for the peaks of all the creases and also the hems of any parts of the fabric that we've got. So once the paint's thinned and ready, we could start looking for such features. And if we take a look at the back of him, we're going to have some creases that are going down his arm just here. So we're looking for the very top of them where we just want to apply a fine line of this colour, just working our way down there like that, just changing the angle as we need to make sure that we're comfortable as you follow these all the way along. Now that's done, we've got the black of the uniform highlighted, so it's time to move on to those two other colours. So we'll start out now with the red, and here what we want is nice bright red, so I'm going to use Demon Red, and then for the white, it's now time to bring in that pure white, so here I'm going to use some White Star. But we'll start out with Demon Red, and to apply it I'm sticking to my small brush, so once again I'm using the size 00, and here we want to follow the same method, but just on those red features, so looking to pick out all the raised up parts and sharper corners of all the texture essentially. So with the paint thinned and ready, we can start out with these little tassels that we've got, and here there's quite a lot of texture, so all you need to do is a quick flick of the brush essentially, just a few times along here just to pick out some of that texture. So very gently along there like that, then a few dots on the knot that we've got just up there like that. Now when it comes to other features such as the strap, here we want to go for the outside edges of it, so to do this, just line up your brush so you're painting in a downward motion along the very edge of it, and just follow it all the way down here like this. And then finally we need to move on to a pure white. So here I'm using some White Star, and this is going to be to highlight the feather. And for this one, we're looking to pick out the raised up texture on the feather itself. So we're looking for these strands that are going out from the centre, and just need to follow them with a little bit of this colour. And there we are with those highlights now applied. The uniform of Nuln is complete. Now, when it comes to painting an army from Nuln, as you can probably tell, you're going to be painting a lot of black. So you do need to be careful because this can look a little bit bland en masse. So it's really important then to look for these accent colours that you can put onto your miniatures. And whether you do the same one across the whole army or vary it from regiment to regiment, the choice really is yours, but definitely make sure to do it just to add a bit more interest to the force. The last uniform we're going to take a look at is for Middenheim, the city of the White Wolf. And for this one, you need to go for blue and white as the principal two colours. Now, just like when we were painting Marienburg earlier on, it's entirely up to you exactly how you place these colours on your miniatures, and also it's entirely up to you what tones you use. But as you're going to be using white as one of them, I find for an Imperial uniform it's a good idea to start out with that white. And this is true for all the other ones that use white, such as Talabheim or Reichland, or anything like that. The reason is because if you're going to be painting it off-white and then wash it with a dark brown wash, what you'll get is a very murky finish. So instead, it's a good idea to separate it with a different kind of shading, then paint everything else in the more usual way. So with that in mind, what we're going to do is start out by base coating an off-white, and then we'll do some shading on it. The off-white I'm going to be using here is some Ivory Tusk, and once more I'm going to be using my rough base coat brush to get this one on here. So it's back to that medium base coat brush, and with this we just need to make sure the paint's thinned and ready, and then it's time to start base coating in the part of the uniform you want to be this colour. Now for my example miniature here, I'm going to be going for a half and half scheme on the uniform, so I'm going to start by base coating this side with this colour all the way down to the feet. So it's just a matter of looking for this part here and looking for that dividing line in the centre, which is going to be just around there, and bringing it all the way down with two thin coats to ensure even coverage before we move on to the next stage. Once you've built up that even finish to the off-white on those parts of the uniform, the next thing to do is apply the shading on it, and this is where we're going to make that special kind of wash for it, because if we use a darker ivory colour and combine it with a medium, what we'll do is create a wash that will give it slightly more sort of a canvassy kind of white. So the colour I'm going to use here is some Griffin Claw, so that's the darker ivory colour, and I'm going to combine it with some Lamia medium, which will give the paint the properties of a wash. So what we need to do is create this on the palette, and to do so I'm using my size 1 brush. You can see I've got some Griffin Claw just there, and what we want to do is get a good puddle of Lamia medium next to it. So I'm just going to build up about 4 brushfuls or so 3 and 4, there we go. Then just get a little bit of Griffin Claw, mix that into it, and this way you can see we've made a wash of that kind of colour. So with that mixed up and ready, all you need to do is paint it over the top of these off-white parts, and a brush of this size will be absolutely fine for this sort of thing, because we don't need loads and loads. Basically just paint it directly over and let it run into the recesses, giving you that shading on these parts. With that mix now dry, you can see we've got the shading there on the white, and it's not too much so as to make it all murky, but it has got that nice almost kind of linen feel to it. So ideal for these sorts of uniforms, and we'll come back to that later on to clean things up. But before we do so, what we should do is base coat the other colours of the uniform. Now for Middenheim, what you'll need is a blue, and it's entirely up to you what shade exactly you go for, but I'm going to use some Witching Hour blue for this one. And then what we should do is introduce an accent colour for all the smaller details. And like with any Empire army, these can be any colours you want, and you can change from regiment to regiment or keep it the same throughout the whole force. The choice is yours, but red always works well with this colour scheme, so I'm going to be using Sanguine Scarlet once more. But first of all, we need some of that Witching Hour blue, and to apply this I'm going to go for my size 1 brush, and that's because in the application for this one you need to be careful when you get into the parts where you're going to be meeting that white. Basically you need to be as neat as possible in those parts, so a brush like this is going to be ideal for that. With the paint thinned and ready, we can then start painting the other half of this uniform, and as I mentioned earlier, Empire miniatures do tend to have some nice dividing lines to help guide where that central line is going to be. You can see one just here. All we've got to do is run down that and then follow it all the way through down to the bottom, and aside from that, it's just a matter of blocking in this half of the uniform. And once you're happy with the blue, it's time to move on to your accent colour. In this case, I've chosen red, so I'm using Sanguine Scarlet, and an obvious candidate for this is going to be the feather, which I'm just going to block in, but also it's a good idea to keep an eye out for any other useful features for this sort of thing, such as tassels or ribbons, anything like that. Once you're happy with the blue and your accent colour, we can then apply a wash onto these two, and in this case using the dark brown wash is going to be ideal, so I'm going to use some Battle Mud wash. And we can also use it in quite a select way on the white, but to do so we need to make sure we're using the right kind of brush. So I'm going to use my size 1 brush again for this, and what we want to do is neatly apply this mainly just onto the blue and the red, and having a brush of this size is really going to help out because we need to keep it off the main parts of the white. So you just need to load up your brush, and to apply this, what I like to do is start a short distance away from the white. So for example, on this part of the uniform here, I'd apply it in this region and use this initial application almost like a reservoir to draw the paint from, to start pushing it around from here. This means that by the time you get to where the blue meets the white, you won't have loads of paint left on your brush, meaning you have the accuracy that you can bring it up to that join between the two colours, but not over it onto the white. But aside from that, it's just a matter of painting it directly over the blue and the red, so it runs into the recesses and gives you that shading. Now on the white areas, there may be some parts where you want to have a little bit of darker shading in some of the deeper recesses. You won't need very many, but for example, if you look at things such as the crevice of his arm just here on the inside of the elbow, you can make this a little bit darker by just dotting a tiny bit of wash into that region too, for a little bit more contrast in that area. The wash is now dry, giving us that shading there on the blue and the red, and you can see the real difference in that we do have the shading on both parts, but it's not quite so murky and dark on the white, meaning that as we move into layering now, it's going to be nice and easy to get it nice and clean again on that white before we then move on to highlight it. So for that white, what we should do is return to the original off-white we used, which in our case was Ivory Tusk, and to apply it this time I'm using my size 0 brush, so slightly smaller brush here for a bit more accuracy, because with this one, like with all the other layering we've been doing, we want to make sure we concentrate on those raised up flatter areas whilst avoiding recesses. So for example, if we take a look at his arm around here, it means that we're going to be applying the paint onto flat areas like over the shoulder just here, but as we get down to these creases, we just want to make sure we just avoid those darker areas. And here we have the model with that white cleaned up, and I also brought some of that white over into the slashes that we got on the elbow just there, because I thought it'd be nice to have a bit of the white over on that side, and I'll do the same with the blue on the little slashes we've got just over there. And speaking of the blue, that's where we're going to go to next, because we need to layer that colour too. In this case, I'm returning to the original colour here, which was Witching Hour Blue. Now once that's done, we should then turn our attention to the accent colour, and again go back to your original colour here, whichever you've chosen. In my case, that's going to be some Sanguine Scarlet. But first of all, what we need is Witching Hour Blue, and to apply it I'm going for the exact same method as what I just did on the white. So once again, I'm using the size 0 brush, and with this, once it's thinned and ready, it's just a matter of reapplying it onto the blue side of the uniform, again looking to avoid any recesses as we encounter them, such as the stitching lines that we've got around here. And as I mentioned, I'm going to also introduce just a little bit of blue into these slashes that we've got just along here. And once you're happy with that blue, it's then time to return to your accent colour. So here I'm back to Sanguine Scarlet. And once again, we're looking to concentrate on the raised up flatter areas whilst carefully avoiding any recesses. All three colours are now nice and tidy, so you could leave the uniform there if you want to, but if you decide you want to highlight it, then I recommend starting out with the white parts. And for this, what you'll need is a pure white, so I'm going to use some White Star now, and it's time to move to your finest brush. So I'm using my size 00 here for lots of control, because now it's time to start really emphasising all the creases and edges that we can find. So get that paint thinned down, and once you've got it ready, be careful not to overload it so that you retain that fine tip of your brush, and then it's time to start looking for these edges and things. And it's going to be things such as the creases we've got around the arm just here, where you just want to make sure the model's nice and comfortable in your hand so that you can easily access the area, and then it's just a matter of looking for the very peak of these creases and picking them out, and also looking out for the hems of the fabric too, such as around the sleeve here, and following that as well. Once that's done, the white half is complete, so we can highlight the other half and the red accents too. And so for the blue, what I'm going to use is some Leviathan blue, and then for the red, I'm going back to some Demon red. But I'll start out with Leviathan blue, and for the application here, it's identical to what we've just done with that white, where we're looking to emphasise all those corners and edges and any creases that really stand out, all that sort of thing. So once your paint's thinned and ready, we can start looking for them and picking these out as well, such as we've got the seam that goes just down here. We just want to go along that edge with this downward motion using the tip of the brush, but also we've got lots of creases up here too. And again, we're just looking for the peak of them and want to follow along each one. And then finally, it's time to highlight the red accent colour. So here you need a bright red. In my case, I'm using some Demon red, and I'm looking to pick out all the raised up texture of these parts, such as the feather up here, where I'm looking for these raised up strands. And here we are, with those highlights applied, we have the completed Middenheimer uniform, all clean and tidy, in particular on the white half of it. And speaking of the white half, this is something to really take away from the way we approach this particular uniform, because whilst going for a dark brown wash works really well on lots of features, as you've seen in this video, when it comes to painting the white uniform, what it will do is make the white really murky and quite dirty, so cleaning it up takes a long time, and by doing this, it can be quite difficult to get it nice and smooth and, well, neat and tidy. So instead, what I recommend you do is approach it in the way we did in this part of the video, where we created our our own wash using a darker ivory colour mixed with a medium. And if you do this, you'll find you'll get softer shading, clean it up as much quicker, and you get more of a sort of natural material feel to it, which is really appropriate with these troops. Now this of course works very well on any miniature where you do have white parts of the uniform, but it's especially important when you're doing Reichlanders because their uniform is almost entirely white. So if you approach it with this in mind, you'll find painting that colour scheme actually becomes very easy. And so there you have it, 3 great ways of painting 3 different Empire uniforms. Now, whilst we did concentrate on these 3 particular cities, it's worth noting that all the methods and techniques I've shown you here can be applied to any sort of state uniform you might want to paint. And when it comes to painting these different uniforms, you have an enormous amount of choice in how you lay out the colours on the uniform and even what sort of tones you go for. So have fun, and we'll see you again very soon.